abrupt psychological climax, there can be no doubt that Joan's love for the Canadian had been growing steadily and irresistibly all the time. It now rushed to the surface, so that she recognized it. That was all. And it has always seemed to me that the presence of John's silence, so potent, so quietly efficacious, produced an effect, if one may say so, of a psychic forcing-house, and hastened incalculably the bringing together of these two wild lovers. In that sudden awakening had occurred the very psychological climax required to reveal the passionate emotion accumulated below. The deeper knowledge had leapt across and transferred itself to her ordinary consciousness, and in that shock the collision of the personalities had shaken them to the depths and shown her the truth beyond all possibility of doubt. "He's sleeping quietly now," the doctor said, interrupting my reflections. "If you'll watch alone for a bit, I'll go to Maloney's tent and help him arrange his thoughts." He smiled in anticipation of that arrangement. He'll never quite understand how a wound on the double can transfer itself to the physical body. But at least I can persuade him that the less he talks and explains tomorrow, the sooner the forces will run their natural course now to peace and quietness. He went away softly, and with the removal of his presence, Sangree, sleeping heavily, turned over and groaned with the pain of his broken head. And it was in the still hour just before the dawn, when all the islands were hushed, the wind and sea still dreaming, and the stars visible through clearing mists, that a figure crept silently over the ridge and reached the door of the tent where I dozed beside the sufferer before I was aware of its presence. The flap was cautiously lifted a few inches, and in looked Joan. That same instant Sangree woke and sat up on his bed of branches. He recognized her before I could say a word, and uttered a low cry. It was pain and joy mingled, and this time all human. The girl, too, was no longer walking in her sleep, but fully aware of what she was doing. I was only just able to prevent him from springing from his blankets. "Joan! Joan!" he cried, and in a flash she answered him. "I'm here. I'm with you always now," and had pushed past me into the tent and flung herself upon his breast. "I knew you would come to me in the end," I heard him whisper. "It was all too big for me to understand at first," she murmured, "and for a long time I was frightened." "But not now!" he cried now louder. "You don't feel afraid now of anything that's in me?" "I fear nothing," she cried. "Nothing! Nothing!" I let her outside again. She looked steadily into my face with eyes shining and her whole being transformed. In some intuitive way, surviving probably from the somnambulism, she knew or guessed as much as I knew. "You must talk tomorrow with John Silence," I said gently, leading her towards her own tent. "He understands everything." I left her at the door, and as I went back softly to take up my place of sentry again with the Canadian, I saw the first streaks of dawn lighting up the far rim of the sea behind the distant islands. And as though to emphasize the eternal closeness of comedy to tragedy, two small details rose out of the scene and impressed me so vividly that I remember them to this very day. For in the tent where I had just left Joan, all a-quiver with her new happiness, there rose plainly to my ears the grotesque sounds of the boatswain's mate heavily snoring, oblivious of all things in heaven or hell. And from Maloney's tent, so still was the night, where I looked across and saw the lantern's glow, there came to me through the trees the monotonous rising and falling of a human voice, that was beyond question the sound of a man praying to his God. The End of The Camp of the Dog by Algernon Blackwood.